I'd like to take a moment to share with you a solid conversation that I had with a new client couple. It's my hope that what I share with them is a help to you, the way it was to them. He is 34, she's 33. They've been married for 11 years. They have two children, ages 8 and 10. They came to me, he said, because Doc, I'm coming and we both watch your content, and it was my suggestion that we talk to you as a last resort. I said, what's going on? He said, well, I wanted us to come to you because our marriage is one-sided. It's completely one-sided, and he's tried everything that he could, according to him, to try to salvage this marriage. I said, well, how is it one-sided? He said, well, absolutely everything is about her. Everything is about her, and he doesn't think it's right. He doesn't think he has much of a say in the marriage in the sense of the things that he desires and wants to pursue, that he absolutely is open with her and supportive of her for the things that she wants to pursue, and this is not being reciprocated. I said, ma'am, is this true? She said, well, yes, but partially. I said, well, what do you mean? She said, well, I just don't like the things that he wants to do. I said, well, give me an example of something he wants to do. She said, well, right now he wants to quit his job and open up his own business and pursue it rather as a full-time entrepreneur. He does it a little bit on the side, but he wants to go brick and mortar and he wants to open it full-time. I said, and you're not in agreement of this? She said, not at all. I said, why? She said, well, I just don't like, his, what he's into, isn't anything illegal or anything. They told me what it was. I won't share on the video. She said, but that's just not my thing. And so he asked me about it and I'm not supportive of it. He said, Doc, when I come to her about anything that I like, she doesn't like it. It's just not this business. I come to her and I address any decisions that I want to make with her before I make the decisions. And she doesn't like anything that I bring to her. And not only does she not like anything that I bring to her, she doesn't do that at all with me. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, she doesn't address anything with me. She just goes out and does what she wants to do. I said, ma'am, is this true? She didn't say anything. I looked at her again and said, ma'am, is this correct? She said, well, it is kind of, sort of. And then she got quiet again. I said, do one of you want to explain to me what's going on? He said, well, she left her full-time job to become a full-time entrepreneur because of stress. I said, what happened? She said, well, I was on this particular job and the job was very stressful and it was creating a lot of anxiety. She has challenges with anxiety, and she has had challenges with anxiety since after they were married. I said, was any of this postpartum related? She said, no, it wasn't postpartum related. Not at all. Got through the pregnancies fine, but just had challenges with anxiety. She believes that was directly connected to her work. I said, it was directly connected to your work, according to you, right? She said, yeah. And this anxiety caused me to be really stressed out. And so I was coming to him and telling him that I was really stressed out on my job. And he was asking me what I wanted to do about it. And so I said to him, I want to be a full-time entrepreneur. I said, sir, is this correct? He said, yes. Not only is it correct, but I encouraged her. If that's what you want to do, I want to support you. Let's just look at the timing of all of this and make sure that we do it in good timing. We were newly married. The kids were really small. And I just wanted us to make sure that we did it with the right timing so that it wouldn't negatively impact our marriage. I said, ma'am, is this correct? She said, yes, sir. I said, so then what happened? She said, well, I talked to my therapist. And when I talked to my therapist told me I needed to think about what was best for me and to go ahead and quit my job and to go ahead and pursue this entrepreneurship opportunity full time. I said, really? She said, yeah. I said, sir, is that true? He said, it absolutely is. She talked to her therapist and her therapist said to her that she needed to go ahead and quit because the anxiety was getting the best of her. And she needed to think about herself and quit her job and go ahead and pursue her career full time. And what she did is she quit the job and then told me about it after she quit, days after she quit, and then said to me she was starting her own business. I said, ma'am, is that true? She said, it is. I said, ma'am, you don't see anything wrong with that? She said, no, my therapist told me that I needed to think about my anxiety and how that was causing me to show up every day and be stressed out. And I needed to do something about it so that I could rescue myself. I said, interesting. I said, who's responsible for your anxiety? She didn't say anything. I said, ma'am, you're telling me that your therapist told you that you were well within your right to quit your job without talking to him? Is that correct? She said, yeah. I said, ma'am, your therapist has just gave you some incredibly bad advice. I said, because the reality is, If you're responsible for your anxiety and responsible enough for your anxiety to make the decision to quit your job, you're also responsible enough to do something about your anxiety so that it doesn't impact your marriage. I said, ma'am, your therapist is an enabler. And unfortunately, there are a lot of counselors, therapists, coaches out here that are not thinking about the totality of matters. I said, ma'am, any therapist, counselor, or coach that does not teach you to own your behavior is an enabler. I said, ma'am, you went out here. You're stressed out about your job. I understand stress can occur on jobs. I said, but this man is not making any decisions without engaging you so that you guys can do this as a unit. And you're doing whatever you want to that is for the better of you and not thinking about him. I said, and what's so crazy is that you don't see any responsibility in this. He then interjected and said, sir, I'm going to be honest with you, Doc. I'm not perfect. I have some challenges. I have some flaws in this marriage. I have some flaws as a person, but she will tell you I absolutely own all of my challenges. I never dance around my challenges. I never make my challenges her problem and then do something about it and then expect her to just settle with what I did as if she's not in this marriage. I said, ma'am, is that true? She said, it's absolutely true. I said, ma'am, marriages that work have to acknowledge fault. And the reality is you're in a marriage right now where your husband is stressed out, but he's stressed out not because of something he did. He's stressed out because he's out of alignment. He looked confused. She looked confused. I said, let me explain. I said, sir, your marriage and both of you as individuals both need values. Both of you need values as individuals. What are values? The attitudes, beliefs, perspectives, and principles that govern our lives. That govern how we live our lives. Both of you as individuals need values. I said, but sir, both of you in this marriage, you need a set of values for this marriage so that both of you individually have a set of attitudes, beliefs, perspectives, and principles. But as a couple collectively, you have a set of attitudes, beliefs, perspectives, and principles. I said, why? Because that keeps you on the same page. I said, and right now, this is an individual free-for-all where she's doing whatever she wants to do. You have a set of values. You're trying to align this marriage up with a joint set of values, but she's not interested because she's on her own. And I said, ma'am, when there is no alignment between your values and your marriage, this creates stress. I said, he's stressed out because he's trying to align this marriage up with a set of values. You're stressed out because you're doing your own thing and you actually think it's okay because a therapist told you to. I said, ma'am, you're married. You're not single. And this is not to minimize your anxiety. I said, but if you feel that way, take it whatever way you need to take it. But the reality is this man, you admit it, has been supportive of you through your anxiety. Is that correct? She said, yeah. I said, you admitted to me that this anxiety had nothing to do with postpartum, so we can't make that excuse. Is that correct? She said, it is. I said, you let one therapist tell you, go ahead and choose you, but that therapist also didn't tell you you're also in a marriage, which means you can have individual values where you need to choose you, and you should, but you also should have collective values where you need to consider who. She said, my husband. I said, interesting. I said, sir, this is where you are. I said, the stress that you're experiencing right now is because what you're saying, what you believe in, what you're doing aren't on the same page. I said, sir, you want peace in this marriage, don't you? He said, yeah. I said, you believe you deserve peace in this marriage, don't you? He said, yeah. I said, is staying in this marriage creating peace? He said, it's not. She doesn't support anything that I do. Everything that I've got going on, I run to her to try to get her advice. She's even looked at me and told me in my face, you can do whatever you want to do. I'm not into that. Just do what you want to do. But meanwhile, when she wanted to establish her business, quit without even telling me, I supported us, put us $40,000 in debt to support something that I had no say in. And she won't even talk me through the decisions I want to make. I said, ma'am, that's all true, right? She put her head down. I said, perfect. You don't have nothing to say. Let me give you an analogy to make this make sense. I said, recently I was at the grocery store. I happened to be by myself this day. Sometimes my children go with me. And there was a lady that was checking out, and she had two children with her. They had to have been no older than 10 or 11, maybe 9 or 10. And the things were going down the conveyor belt. She paid for it. The cashier put a couple of bags on the counter, maybe 5 or 6 bags. The lady has her kids standing right there. They're standing right there looking at the bags right in front of them. The lady puts her purse back in or puts her wallet back in her purse, puts her purse back on her arm. She grabs the receipt. She grabs all the bags. They're walking out. The kids have no bags. They're both listening. I said, but that wasn't odd. What was odd is that while they were walking out of the store, the kids started asking for more things on the way out. And they wanted her to get her keys. And one of them asked for the keys. One of them asked for something, some pumpkins or something that was sitting on the side. One of the kids wanted a pumpkin. Another kid wanted something out of one of the little toy machines. They're asking for all of these things. And this lady already has her hands full. I said, ma'am, when everything is in your hands, you can't solve anything because everything is already in your hands. She started to tear up a little bit. He said, Doc, that's exactly how I've been feeling. I've been sitting up here solving all of her problems. Meanwhile, my hands are full and I feel like I'm not getting any traction on my life in the name of trying to be a noble husband for a wife who only looks out for herself. I said, well, sir, she is initially supposed to look out for herself because anxiety is a her issue. When we have anxiety, when we have stress, that ain't our partner's problem. And we got to get out of this validation narrative where we show up in spaces expecting people to own our anxiety and own our stress. I said, ma'am and sir, the number one owner of stress and anxiety is the person it belongs to. And I said, this is why we have a culture of so many weak, pathetic people who look around expecting everybody to care more about their anxiety than they handle it themselves. I said, ma'am, you're responsible for your own anxiety first. I said, and where you failed is that you have not taken initial responsibility and then have gotten upset with him when he's trying to help you take responsibility for something that doesn't even belong to him. I said, ma'am, his hands are already full. He's walking out of the store with a handful of bags. And here you are, like a 10 or 11-year-old, asking him for more, demanding more, being completely unaware of the fact that what? His hands are already full. I said, this speaks to this whole 50-50 narrative too. This 50-50 culture that we live in, which in my honest opinion is complete trash. 50-50 is trash because it rarely happens where a couple is going to be able to function in a marriage on a 50-50 basis, doing half of anything. I said, but ma'am, 60-40 is better. If he's doing 60% of the caring and you're doing 40%, it's better. I said, but you're still not even giving half of your effort and he's giving a little bit more than half, but he's not operating in the most optimal space. He said, Doc, what's the most optimal space? And he put a smile on his face as if he knew the answer. I said, sir, if you're doing 90% and she's doing 10, that ain't better either. I said, it feels noble, but that's what's going on here. You're giving 90% effort. You're giving 90% consideration. She's giving 10% effort and 10% consideration, all in the name of anxiety that she won't own as her own personal responsibility. I said, and this is where resentment lives. When one person does 90% of the work and the other person does 10 and they stay in the marriage, this is how you begin to resent your partner. This is how you begin to get angry with your partner. This is how you begin to regret even marrying your partner. I said, and this is where you are right now. I said, what's the best option? 100. I said, when both partners are giving 100% effort in a marriage and they're both giving 100% of everything they have in that marriage, you ain't got a lot of room for resentment. I said, ma'am, this is either going to be a situation where it's us, meaning you two together, or it's going to be you against him. But to allow a therapist to tell you to choose you over your husband in the name of your anxiety, something you have refused to own yourself, is not only selfish, it's clueless. She was crying on the call. I sat there and looked. I said, sir, I'm going to give you some honest advice right in front of your wife, that if she does not take responsibility for her own anxiety to the extent that she's not only addressing that, but also being mindful and open and bringing 100% effort to this marriage so that she's being mindful of your needs, I would highly consider you look at your list of values and ask yourself, do your values align up with being married? Because if she's not going to show up as the best version of herself, if she's only going to consider her own needs and not consider the needs of her husband, then maybe your values don't speak to you staying in this marriage. He was very thankful for the call. She was as well. It took her some time to gather herself. They're still trying to figure some things out. Grateful that they allowed me to share the story. They're still trying to figure some things out, but mainly she is now looking to see if she can find a different therapist or counselor. I made it very clear to her that if it's a you versus me situation, then it can't be a marriage because it ain't an us situation. I hope this made sense. If it did, type church in the comments with 3 R's. And then remember, you've got 2 jobs. 1, be better today than what you were yesterday. And 2, don't forget what I told you. What's up, everybody? This is Dr. Zeb. Listen, I've been dying to make this announcement for a very long time now, and I'm pleased to say that Inspire Nation has officially launched. Yes, we finally got a Facebook and YouTube community group where we're going to have exclusive content, exclusive shorts, exclusive discussion prompts, where we're going to engage with other people literally around the world who are on the same healing journey that we're on. I need you to go find these pages right now on Facebook and YouTube. Inspire Nation, follow the page, join the group, introduce yourself, and be prepared to link up with literally thousands of people around the world who are on the same healing journey, who are looking for the same resources, and who want to also be surrounded with other like-minded individuals who are growing in the same direction as you are. I'm so excited about this because it's the beginning of some great things I can't talk about right now. Listen, you got two jobs. One, be better today than what you were yesterday. And two, don't forget what I told you.